The card showed up on a Tuesday in March, sandwiched between the water bill and a grocery flyer. Nothing strange about it, really, except for one sentence in my grandmother's slanting handwriting. She'd told me 16 years ago I'd only ever see that line if something had gone very, very wrong. I'm Marisol Hale, and for 8 years, I was basically invisible to my own family. They didn't scream at me or accuse me of letting them down. They didn't need to. They just slipped me quietly off to the side, like I was some porcelain figurine they weren't sure how to dust. I want to start there before the card, because nothing that happened after makes sense if you don't know how carefully they'd built my invisibility, doing their best never to let it feel like punishment. That whole shift in how my family treated me started when I was 20. I was wrapping up my sophomore year, pre-med, working a research gig I'd clawed my way into, and suddenly my body staged a total rebellion. First, insomnia. Then chest pain ER twice in a month. Then anxiety piled on so thick I once stood outside an exam hall for 40 minutes, hand trembling, unable to cross the threshold. A doctor called it generalized anxiety disorder with panic features and told me to take a medical withdrawal. So I came home that may not disgraced. Exactly. Just quietly demoted. I spent 8 years living in that shadow. Russell and Denise, my parents, weren't harsh about it. Let's get that straight. They got worried. And, in our house, worry meant a precise, permanent lowering of the bar. I became the daughter they didn't push, the one allowed to skip the tough questions and stay out of family business talk. Nobody meant it as an insult. But somehow, asking anything of me again seemed risky, so they just didn't. It's strange, looking back, how that kind of thing settles into a house without anyone deciding it on purpose. Nobody sat down and said, "We're gonna stop expecting things from her now." It just happened, meal by meal, conversation by conversation, my name slowly dropping out of sentences that used to include it. My mother stopped asking if I had opinions about anything that mattered. My father stopped inviting me to sit in on the parts of dinner where he talked through a problem at a job site, the way he used to when I was a teenager who actually liked hearing about it. I noticed, in the dull, distant way you notice weather changing. And then I just adjusted, the way you adjust to weather. Meanwhile, my brother Preston slipped into the role I'd left open, like water finding the lowest spot. He was always better at the effortless charm anyway, cracking up clients on job sites, clipboard in hand, the future of Dad's company. After I came home, his rise kept right on rolling while mine just stopped. No one in the family ever said it, but it was almost as if my pause explained his progress. Like there was only so much attention to go around the table, and once mine got redirected toward worry, his got redirected toward praise, and the math of it just worked out, season after season, without anyone doing it on purpose. Eventually, I finished school, just not as a doctor. I went for urban planning. It wasn't flashy, but I liked figuring out how towns actually got built, how someone decides where a road goes, or why a building is safe for people to set foot inside. It took me 4 more years, working part-time all the way, and then I landed at the county zoning and permits office. The pay was okay, the work relentless, and mostly ignored, and my family treated it, when they talked about it at all, like proof that I'd found my rightful small place. I still remember my mother telling a neighbor, within earshot, something with paperwork, very low stress, which is good for her. She said it so gently, like a parent explaining a special diet. I remember thinking, in that calm you get after a storm, that she honestly had no idea what my job was because she'd never once bothered to ask. But I knew. Every week, I pushed through tangle after tangle of filings, structural permits, inspections, the works. Nothing glamorous, just making sure that, before anyone moved into a building, it really was what it claimed to be. And I got good at it, slowly, without anyone noticing. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in being quietly excellent at something nobody at your own dinner table thinks to ask about. I used to tell myself it didn't bother me. Mostly, by then it didn't. Almost 2 years before Grandma's card, a small detail caught my eye. A sign-off on a permit tied to my dad's company, dated a week before the inspection supposedly happened. Maybe a clerical goof. Maybe something more. Though I couldn't imagine my father cutting corners like that, and I'd spent years learning to stay out of anything that touched the family business. So I just filed the note and moved on. The only one who never bought into the story of me as fragile was my grandmother, Vivian. She lived alone in a fading Victorian at the edge of town, the kind of place everyone called Grandma's old house, like it belonged more to history than to her. She'd come visit, never in a rush, and she was the person in the family who genuinely listened, asked what I was working on, and waited for answers that weren't just scripts. Even after everything, she didn't tiptoe around me. She wanted to know what I really found interesting. She made me feel for those few hours like myself. I think about that a lot, actually, how rare it is when somebody has decided you're fragile, to have even one person in your life refuse to treat you that way. It doesn't undo the rest of it. It just gives you somewhere to stand that isn't soaked through with everyone else's lowered expectations. Vivian was that place for me for years before any of the rest of this started, and I don't think I appreciated until much later how much that single relationship had quietly kept some other version of me alive underneath all the demotion. When I was 12, before any of this, Vivian taught me a little code. We were out back on the porch, sweet tea sweating in her hand, and she said, "If you ever get a card from me with the words, 'The orchard needs you,' you come right away. Don't tell your parents why. It's not about me. It's about you being needed somewhere else." It was like a secret adventure. I promised and then forgot about it for years, until that Tuesday, opening a card with a watercolor bluebird and, there in the middle, after some talk about her garden and a recipe, those exact words. That night I drove the 2 hours to her house, hands tight on the wheel the whole way, rolling through every wild theory. Some illness she hadn't told anyone about. Some money trouble. Some falling out with a neighbor that had somehow escalated past anything I could picture. None of the guesses I made on that drive came anywhere close to what was actually waiting. She met me at the door looking perfectly well, like she'd just been waiting for company. "Come in, Marisol," she said, and her eyes were bright, serious. "I need to show you something I've never shown anyone outside a tiny circle. Please, just listen." She led me through the house, past rooms I'd eat Christmas dinner in, and stopped at a door I always thought was a closet. Behind it, a hallway I'd never seen. And past that, a big parlor with a fireplace, a heavy old table, and walls lined with filing cabinets sharp and tidy as a lawyer's vault. "This place is bigger than anyone ever noticed," Vivian said. "Been hiding that fact for 30 years. And then she told me what she'd built all that time. For decades she'd hosted a private meeting here every week. 5-6 women, all wives or widows of the town's founding families. Everyone else in town just saw old ladies gossiping over tea. But really, that parlor was the room where they ran things, quietly helped businesses, pulled some secret levers, kept certain contractors' reputations whole, let others not. Not illegal exactly, just soft power, real influence, invisible and everywhere, and nobody had ever thought to look. "My son, your father has no idea," she said. "No one in the family does. I did that on purpose. The second people know you have real pull, they come knocking for the wrong reasons. I wanted him to earn his way on his own, not riding on what I arranged. But I've watched how your parents boxed you in. I never said anything. I didn't want to override their choices. But now something's happening that isn't just family business. You're the only one who can stop it." So what happened? A contractor's wife, Patricia, brought up something the week before. Her husband had been asked to sign off on inspections for a big affordable housing project one my dad's company was building. The instructions were casual sign off early, don't ask questions about the timing. At first her husband brushed it off, then he realized he couldn't stop thinking about it. This kind of clue landed on Vivian's lap the way things always did. Trusted people letting small worries surface. She checked, quietly, the way only someone deeply rooted in town could. And, yes, it was real. My father's company had been faking inspection dates on load-bearing work, the kind of thing that doesn't go wrong right away. But years down the line, a shortcut like that can crumble, with people still living inside. I sat there in the secret room, cold all over, and I remembered the filing I'd seen before. I'd brushed it off because nothing in my life had taught me to suspect my own family of this. "I need your help, Marisol," Vivian said. "I've run this town for years, but I can't flag a structural permit at the county." "You can. You have a job nobody takes seriously, especially not your father. He'd never dream you'd be the one to bring him down if you had to." I won't lie and say that felt triumphant. I didn't feel seen or redeemed. Mostly it felt heavy. Like she trusted me to carry something enormous, and just maybe she was wrong. So I asked, why not go to Dad directly? Just tell him and let him fix it quietly? Vivian's voice went hard and tired. "Because I know my son. He's convinced himself he can patch it later when the pressure eases, and people in that situation almost never fix things until someone forces them. I'm not waiting to see if he's different." I didn't promise anything that night. I drove home in the dark, replaying everything, finally thinking like a professional about that old filing. After that, the weeks crept by. I started visiting Vivian every couple of weekends. Let my parents believe I was helping her with paperwork, which they accepted without a thought. It still gets to me a little, how easy that lie was to tell, how little curiosity it took to slide right past. Nobody asked what kind of paperwork. Nobody asked why it needed 2 hours of driving every other weekend. I'd spent 8 years being the daughter nobody checked up on, and for once, that exact neglect was working entirely in my favor. During one visit, she brought me into that secret meeting. The women, all in their 70s or 80s, eyed me like an exam. They drilled me about my job, the county's rules, testing how well I really knew the system. Polite on the surface, but it was an interview. One of them, a sharp-eyed woman named Eleanor, who barely said 20 words the whole afternoon, watched me answer a question about variance appeals and then just nodded once. Slowly, like she decided something and wasn't going to announce it. I found out much later that nod was apparently the whole point of the meeting. At work, pressure started to build. My boss, Harold, who'd been around longer than I'd been alive, summoned me. He handed over a file, monotone. "We need these amendments pushed through. Upper management wants it done yesterday." I recognized the project right away. The problem landed on my own desk, in my own handwriting, waiting for my signature. I didn't sign. I told Harold I needed more time, technically true, and bought myself a few days. That's all I could manage. I went home that night and sat at my kitchen table for a long time without turning on the lights, just running through what I actually knew and what I was only assuming, trying to separate the two cleanly, the way the job had trained me to. It helped, oddly, to think about it that way, like a filing instead of a family. Filings don't have feelings attached. Filings you can just lay out flat and look at. The heat at home came sideways, disguised as teasing. At Sunday dinner, Preston, already tipsy, turned to me, loud. "How's that paperwork life, Mari? Still stamping forms? Dad and I actually build things." He laughed, head tossed back, not knowing I was holding a secret big enough to wreck the whole business he was so proud of. I just answered mild, easy, but under the table my hands were rock steady. I'd never felt weirder in that house, holding a secret that big, surrounded by people who thought I was holding nothing at all. My mother at the same dinner asked Preston 3 separate questions about a contract he was working on, and didn't ask me a single thing the entire evening, which under any other circumstance would have stung in the same old familiar way. That night it almost made me laugh, quietly into my water glass, because for the first time in 8 years, her not asking meant I didn't have to lie to her face about anything. Everything almost fell apart on a Thursday. My father, picking up on something he could just sense, realized that the South Side filing was getting more attention than he wanted. He called the county office himself, full of that effortless authority people who've always been listened to tend to have, and asked if he could withdraw and resubmit the structural amendment directly. If they'd let him do it before the review period closed, he could have fixed the paperwork quietly, no one outside our company the wiser. Harold answered the call. I sat 2 desks away, listening to my father's voice bleeding through the walls. For what felt like forever, I realized exactly what I was stuck between: helping my own father dodge the consequences, or protecting the people who would live in a building not built the way it was supposed to be. I didn't warn him. I need to say that up front, this wasn't some clean, heroic decision. It gutted me. It felt like standing still and watching someone I loved step into trouble. I could have stopped, and choosing, on purpose, not to move. I remember staring at my computer screen the whole time he was on that call, not typing anything, just listening and feeling something in my chest pull tight enough that I actually pressed a hand against my own ribs without quite meaning to. Harold told my dad the withdrawal would have to go through the standard review, just like any other filing, and hung up. 2 days later, doing exactly what my job allowed, which, funny enough, no one in my family had ever asked me about, I flagged the structural filings for an independent reinspection. I did it openly, in my own name, not because I wanted credit or because I was hiding, but because that's what the process demanded. And after 18 months of nagging questions that had finally added up, that's what I had to do. I remember the exact moment I hit submit on that flag, sitting at my desk during my lunch hour so nobody would walk past and ask what I was working on. My hand actually hovered over the mouse for a few seconds before I clicked it, the same kind of hesitation I imagine soldiers feel before doing something they know is right and still can't make feel easy. What came next wasn't dramatic, at least not like a shouting match. It was routine, slow, out in the open, because that's how real consequences usually happen. A stop work order. An outside engineer came in and confirmed exactly what Patricia's husband had worried about. Mistakes that wouldn't collapse the place instantly, but would have failed over time under the loads the building was supposed to handle. Local news patched up a brief, factual piece, a development nearly brought down before families moved in. My father's company was forced into a remediation process that would eat more money than they ever saved cutting corners. It dragged on for almost a year. Preston, who'd been getting ready to take over operations, wound up in the trenches, managing chaos he wasn't prepared for. All his polished confidence fell apart when real problem solving was called for, and nobody in my family recognized steady, careful competence unless it came from me. I watched some of that unfold from a careful distance, mostly through the same Sunday dinners, which got quieter and tenser as the months went by, my father's jokes drying up, my mother's questions about the company shrinking down to almost nothing because there wasn't much good news left to ask about. Preston stopped needling me about paperwork sometime around month 3. I noticed and didn't say anything about it because some things don't need pointing out to be felt. 3 weeks after the stop work order, Vivian called a family meeting. She didn't gloat, didn't turn it into some dramatic reveal. She just decided, after watching her son finally stumble into a problem he couldn't finesse, that secrecy wasn't useful anymore. She laid out everything. The back wing, her 30 years of guiding things behind the scenes, her part in making sure the fraud was caught before anyone got hurt. She looked straight at my father, whose face showed something unguarded I'd never seen before. She told him, "I didn't do this to get back at you for how you treated your daughter. I did this because what you did was unconscionable, and your daughter was the only person in this family, by job and by character, willing to stop it. Those are separate facts. Don't muddle them just because they both happen to be true. My mother didn't say a word the entire meeting, just sat there with her hands folded in her lap, looking at me every so often like she was trying to recognize someone she'd been living alongside for years without ever actually meeting. I don't know what to call that look exactly. Not pride, not quite. Something closer to a slow, uncomfortable recalculation. My father didn't collapse in shame. That actually surprised me the most. First, he was angry defensive, in a way that happens when you haven't bottomed out yet. Then, for months, he was drained. The long, grinding public process stripped away the easy certainty he'd worn like armor. It took almost a year before he said anything to me about it, and when he finally did, across the kitchen table where, for 8 years, I'd mostly been invisible, he didn't apologize outright. He said, "I don't know how to make sense of the fact that my mother trusted you with something this big, and I never trusted you with anything at all." Not a clean apology. Maybe just the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. I let it be enough. At least for that day, I'd stopped needing him to fix everything in one go. There were other conversations after that one. Slower, less dramatic. The kind that don't make for good stories but actually rebuild something. My mother started calling just to talk, not to relay information about Preston or the company, just to ask how my week had gone, and the first few times it happened, I almost didn't know how to answer, because nobody had asked me that question, genuinely, in so long that I'd forgotten what an honest answer even sounded like coming out of my own mouth. Vivian never handed over her network in dramatic fashion. She was clear. What she'd built wasn't a throne. It was a responsibility. I'd learned the ropes the same slow way she had, not as part of a single grand transfer. I started sitting in on those Thursday gatherings regularly after that, not as an exhibit being evaluated anymore, but as someone actually being taught, Eleanor walking me through decades of quiet decisions, one Thursday at a time, explaining not just what had been done, but why, the careful, unglamorous logic underneath 30 years of influence nobody outside that room had ever been allowed to see. In the end, I didn't receive a mansion or an inheritance. I got the key to a room in my own family's house that everyone else had passed by without a second thought. And, after 8 years of being quietly dismissed, a sign that at least one person in my family had been paying attention the whole time, knew exactly what I could handle, long before I ever believed it myself.